All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions. I see now we have 12 in here, so we may have some more popping in just a moment. Warm welcome to Karen Feeney. She's the supervisor for the North Carolina collection at the Forsyth County Public Library in Winston-Salem. She is a certified archivist and serves on the State Historical Records Advisory Board, SHRAB. She received a bachelor's in anthropology and an MLIS at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. This past year, she visited 2 organizations with SHRAB's Traveling Archivist Program to help them develop plans to organize and preserve their archives and records. And I'm not sure if I pronounced all that right, but I hope so.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
and our next instructor, our next instructor is my colleague at ECU, Jennifer Daugherty. She's our head of the North Carolina collection in the academic library services at East Carolina University. And she also teaches as an adjunct in the library school program at ECU. And she has her bachelor's in English with a minor in women's studies from Eastern Kentucky University and a master's in library science with a certificate in archives and records management from Indiana University's Bloomington. She serves as treasurer for the North Carolina Preservation Consortium, director on the special collections section for the North Carolina Library Association, and is past president of the North Carolina Genealogy Society. So with that, Society of North Carolina Archivists, we welcome our instructors for today's workshop. Thank you.
Yay. Well, thank you for being here. I'm going to get started with the first part. So we're going to talk about government resources for genealogy research. There's a lot out there. This is not exhaustive by any means. I'm going to focus today on census records, Social Security records that you can access, and some immigration and naturalization records and how to access those as well. And feel free if you have any questions, go ahead and are we doing chat or Q&A? Either one, I guess, would be fine.
I can monitor the chat, Karen, if you want to, or unless Marlena wants to. But we did get another comment that somebody said your mic was low.
Oh, no.
Marlena, do you want to monitor chat, or would you like
I can do it. I'll monitor both of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
What to do about my mic? Let's see. Trying to see if I can find the mic. Is that any better? Can anybody hear me okay? I'll try to move it around and see. Oops. Is that any better, Nicole?
I think it sounds good now, Karen.
Okay. I'm going to just move it close to my mouth. Sorry.
And you could also turn captions on, closed caption on for Zoom, if that might help to the audience members. I know that Zoom does have closed captions.
Okay. And maybe, all right, maybe, is this better? Notice that it's got like a little thing inside the, that's better or worse. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. I'll try to talk a little louder then. Okay. So in genealogy, at least here in the North Carolina collection where we do lots of genealogy research, we usually get people started. We have a little starter kit, and we get people when they're coming and they haven't done any genealogy. One of the first things we have them access is the federal census, because it has a lot of information on not only the people that you're searching for, but related people like spouses, children. Sometimes they have brother-in-laws or aunts and uncles living with them. So you can get a whole lot of information about a family unit. Sometimes it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes people don't show up in the census at all. Sometimes you'll see a whole family group. And they definitely vary by year. The prior to independence, when the United States was still British colonies, they did do somewhat of census information, but it was done by trade boards and by the governors. And the colonists were pretty resistant to it, apparently. So they're not always very accurate, but you can find some early prior to the federal census records. I have some resources at the end slide that there's a couple books you can use, and you can access some of these records online as well. But following independence, the federal government needed to pay for the Revolutionary War and to populate the House of Representatives. So that was the reason to start a national census. The first census was in 1790, and it enumerated just the name of the head of household, and then all the other people in the household were just a number, like the number of free white males over 16, under 16, the number of free white females and other free persons, and then the number of enslaved people. So it was a very basic, just kind of people living in the household and just the head of household. The law required the returns to be made on a specific form, but the enumerators for that 1790 census, it was U.S. Marshals and their assistants, they had to furnish their own paper. So a lot of the early census records were on all sorts of different paper, notebooks, and a lot of handwritten information. There's also in the census a 72-year rule that was imposed in 1973 to restrict the release of the census. I guess there's a statute 13, I think, where it talks about government records and how some, the privacy of public records. And it was in the 50s, or actually, I think when the first census came out, I think it was like a 50-year rule. But then in the 50s, they determined that it should probably be a little bit longer than 50 years. And when the 1900 census was about to come out, they decided to go with the 72-year rule, even though it was challenged in the courts a little bit, but then they decided to adopt it in 1973. So that's why every 72 years we get a new census. The most recent one is the 1950, and then the next one will be the 1960, which will probably come out, I think, in 2032, I believe. So we got about 7 more years to wait for that one. So I'm going to kind of go through these slides a little fast because I want to actually get to a point where I can actually show you guys how to find these records online. So 1790 to 1840, you only get the head of household on the census records. They have the number of free white males and females, other free people, and then the enslaved people. And they're just by number, so there's no name attached. They did change them through the years that Congress would come out with new acts regarding the census, and they would want to collect different types of information. So they added and deleted different things through the years, and you can find lists of those. These are just a couple of the major things that they added or changed. Like 1810, 1820, they didn't count Native Americans who were not taxed. The age ranges were added for free and enslaved Black people in 1820. Number of foreigners, and then workers in agriculture, commerce, and manufacturing. So these are all just different things that they added in over the years. And I'll show you where you can find a list of all of that published online. The 1850 and the 1860 census. The 1850 census is the first one to name everyone in the household by name. So that's usually a good one to start with if you're, as you're going back through. That 1850 and 1860, when African American people are doing their genealogy, and they're trying to find an enslaved ancestor, once they get past the 1850 census, it gets really hard for them to find individuals in their family because they're not listed by name on the census. So that's one of the real caveats to the census. But the 1850 census was they actually had categories for fugitive enslaved individuals and the number of people who were freed. And then the 1850 and 1860 census also had slave schedules, and they listed the enslaver and the ages and sex for each enslaved person. So they still weren't they're not that helpful because they don't name the person. But if you knew that you have an enslaved ancestor and you knew who the enslaver was, you could look on the slave schedules and you could look and see if there was a person of about their age and their sex listed. So then you could know that that person, and then generally with like African American genealogy will say go to that person's estate records, and then you can look and see if you can find a inventory list, because during slavery, enslaved people were considered property, so they would show up as an inventory list. But then you can sometimes find the name for that person, or you can also search for deed records as well. The 1870 census was the first census to list formerly enslaved persons by name. That's not the first time that African Americans show up on federal records, though, because in 1867, there was when the southern states that seceded wanted to come back into the Union, the federal government said you had to register all of your men who were of legal age to vote, whether they were black or white. So the 1867 voter registration rolls are actually the first time that a lot of African Americans show up in a federal record by name. And then in 1880 was the first one that recorded place of birth for each person and their parents, and it also listed the number of months unemployed. The 1890 census, the genealogist nightmare. There was a fire in 1921, and a lot of the census was actually lost more to water damage than to the fire. It got really moldy, so they threw it out. It was destroyed in 1935. There are pieces of it left, so you can still find fragments of it. But yeah, that's just missed opportunity there. But through 1890 to 1910, this is the information that was recorded, like the number of children a woman had and the number still living. They recorded whether a Civil War sailor, a soldier, a Marine, a Union or Confederate, or a widow, if they rented or owned their home, or if it was a farm, the number of years in the US, and if they could speak English. And then in 1920, they added the mother tongue with place of birth. And then in 1930, they added value of home and radio sets, if they lived on a farm, and then a veteran and then what war or expedition. And in 1940, they added employment status of persons over 14 and amount of money earned. In 1950, they expanded the employment information for persons over 14. So those are just kind of a quick run through, but let me see if this one comes up. So one of the resources that are really, really helpful is Family Search. It's a free site. If you don't have to, one of the things that we love to use is they have a research wiki, and it's for pretty much everything under the sun for genealogy. You don't need to be logged in to use the research wiki. You only need it to search the records or to have a family tree on here. You can have a free family tree on here as well. But you can search, it's worldwide searching. You go to United States, if you want to do just the United States records. And then and this is how you get into the research wiki. And these are all of the different things that you can search. You can do genealogy records, you can do church records, colonial records, compiled genealogy. I mean, they just have bazillion. You can search by state. You can do online record search, getting started. I mean, they have a bazillion different things that you can search. But I want to show you this little handout, which comes down in the census records. You click on census and then go to So this is the basic family information found on census by year. So it'll tell you by census what information was dropped or what was added. So it's kind of a little helpful chart. Because it's important to know what information you're going to be able to find on the census. And then the Indian census rolls were taken from 1885 to 1940. It was an act of July 4th, 1884. It required Indian agents to add, they did annual reports on the reservations that they managed, and they had add a census of Indians on the reservation to the annual reports. So they weren't very specific on the very first one. I think they got just like name, age, sex, and relationship to head of household. And they did change them over time. In 1930, they added the percentage of blood, or the Indian blood. So F equaled full blood, a quarter plus was equal to equal more than a quarter, and then a quarter minus equal less than a quarter. And the reason they did the census because they have allotments. So they wanted to make sure that Indians who were enrolled in the tribe were able to get their allotments. This is the 1895 Cherokee census for North Carolina. And you can see it just had, this is their roll number, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it has the Indian name. Excuse me 1 second. Let's go out in my office. It drives me crazy. Sorry about that. So it has an Indian name, English name, sex, relationship, and that's to the head of household, and then age. And then this is the 1915, and it has that says, but that's their roll number. It has Indian name, which by 1915 they didn't really post a lot of their Indian names because of assimilation. They but some of them still had them in their English names. So and then it had relationship to head and date of, I can't read what that one was, and then sex. I think that's date of birth. And then this one is the 1933, which they made it landscape rather than portrait. And they added in age, sex, thing. So this one actually includes the tribe. Oops, sorry. And then this is the degree of blood. And then I'm going to pull this up on the this is the relationship to the head of household, whether they are living. I think that's whether they were living on the reservation or in their area, and if they're a ward, and if they have their allotment. And then there are non-population schedules also. There's agricultural from 1850 to 1870. There is, so you can find the name of owner or manager. That's the really important thing. I mean, it's good to know this other information, but you really want to know if they had a owner or manager. And then manufacturing, the 1810 is problematic. I don't think it was, it didn't collect information evenly. And then 1820 and the 1850 and 1880 has a little bit more information, but this is also another one where you have the name of the manufacturer. That's the genealogy part, that's and number of women and men employed, but it doesn't really have more information. But if you can find the name of the manufacturer, if you know that you have an ancestor who was had a business in any of those years, you might be able to find them on there. The mortality schedules were 1850 to 1885, and these were taken the year before the census. And they record a lot of information. This one's from North Carolina, and it lists their name, their age, whether they're male or female, their color, what they did, their place of birth, what they did for a living, and then what they died of. And that's what they did for a living. I can't remember what this is. But we'll look that up so I can. Occupation, cause of death. So these did change over time as well. And then the social statistics, they're just kind of information about communities, because sometimes if you can figure out what your ancestors were doing, sometimes that makes a little bit, can give you some hints as to where you might find some records. So if you get a snapshot about the community they're living in, sometimes it can, you can figure out, it'll give you some tips on where to look, like whether they were a teacher or they worked in a newspaper or something like that. And then finding the census online. So now we can go and search. If you have a family search and you want to search along, that's great. Or if you have Ancestry, most public libraries and I think universities have Ancestry accounts, so you can get on those for free. You usually have to be on a computer at the library to get on those. Or you can go to a family history center. There are family history centers all over the place. They are part of, they're part of family search centers. And they're kind of open limited hours, but they have free resources you can go and use. I know that they have got, let's see, they're only open Tuesday and Wednesday, but they've got, I don't know, I can show you what they have. They've got access to a lot of different databases, like they've got MyHeritage, they've got Find My Past, they've got American Ancestor. So those are all kind of pricey databases that most libraries don't have, but you can get them access free through the family search centers. So it's a really great service that they provide. And then Family Search is free with an account. And then Heritage Quest comes through NC Live. We have it through my library. Most public libraries probably have access to that. My library has MyHeritage, so you might want to check your local library and see if they have MyHeritage. They've got millions of records, very similar to Ancestry. And I can show you. So Ancestry, this is what it looks like on the library side. And if you want to search for like census and voter lists, you just click on census and voter lists. And then if you want to look at the federal census, you just click on the federal census. And then down here, you can go from the 1790 and you can pick your years. They have the slave schedules here. They've also got the veteran schedule. They've got, they had some other censuses like the 1880 for defective, dependent and delinquent classes. They've got enumeration district maps. So if you're trying to figure out where your ancestor was living, or you're trying to look up land, you can look through the district maps and see if you can find, or if you can't find them on the census, but you want to look through the district maps and maybe see if you can figure out where their census is from that. But sometimes that's a workaround. There's the Indian census roll, so you can search those as well. Those are kind of interesting to search because you can go by jurisdiction. This is kind of different North Carolina. And it just comes up with the microfilm. So you can, and if you don't have a name to search, you can search them this way. And so here's the 1915 one. I don't have any Native American ancestors, so I wasn't sure how to, I mean, I could have picked somebody to search, but it's, you can add as much or as little as you want of information that you might have about your ancestors to search. And then there's also this information which tells you what the database contains. And this is really helpful information when you're trying to do research, because it will tell you if the information that you're looking for is even available in this database. I always search here first to see, okay, this is information that might be there. So that's, and also like years are always important. If you're looking for somebody 1865, this is not going to help because it starts at 1885. So just something to think about when you're doing searches. The federal census. It's 1900. You can choose it by state. So if you just have like a name and maybe a town they lived in, you can try to search it that way. This is my great grandfather, so he should come up in here. So this is him. So he's 15. Tells you the street number, the house number, race, gender. He's the son of the father, to the head, the relation to the head of the household. So he's the son. His father's name is Michael. His father's birthplace was Ireland. Mother's name is Jenny. She was born in Boston. He's a student. And then these are his siblings. And there's his mother and father. And I always go and look at the record itself because sometimes names are spelled wrong. Sometimes, especially with handwriting, it's sometimes very illegible. And sometimes the scans are not that great. Sometimes they're just hard to read. So it's always good to check them. You'll see lots in the spellings all through genealogy and on record. So it's always good to check the original. So that doesn't even look like one. I'm just trying to take off that. But these, I like the going on to the records because you can actually zoom in and see what's listed here. So you have a line number, a street, a house number. So this is all the categories that are on the census for that year, for 1900. You got relation to head, race, sex, birth month, birth year, age, marital status, years married, children born, children living, birthplace, father's birthplace, mother's birthplace, immigration year, years in U.S., naturalization, occupation, once not employed, attended school, can read, can write, can speak English, owned or rented, so that's your home, owned, free or mortgage, farm or house, farm schedule, and then so you can get a lot of information if you can find the right census. And that's the snapshot of the whole household. So it'll start a new line when you see head here, and then I guess that says head, but you see wife, and then you have that. So this is how you tell like when each family group starts. You have to start where it says the head of household, and then it's everybody in relation to that person is underneath them on that census record. So that's what the census, and then really, these are like, could be helpful records. This is always a good place to go and look for additional information. Here's the 1920 census. He should be married by now. No, actually, he's a widow by now. That's right. Yeah, he's widowed. So this is my great grandfather in the 1920 census in Boston, and his brother and sister-in-law came because he had 2 sons. And then that is their niece and their maid. And the 1920 census added, let's see. The house number, number of the dwelling, number of families, in order of visitation. Then you have the name of each person whose place of abode on January 1st, 1920 was in the family, relation. So if the home is owned or if it's free or mortgage, then you have sex, color or race, age, the last birthday, if they're single or married, and then their citizenship information and education, and then place of birth. This is for the head of household. Mother tongue. Oh, this is for each person, and then their mother tongue, which I guess they didn't. Down here they put English, Russian. This family might be on the other page. Then you have father and mother, and then over here you have whether able to speak English. Then you have trade, profession, industry, business, and then you have employee salary or wage, and then number of farm schedule. So if it was for a farm. When you see it and it comes up like this and it has these colors on it, that means this is what you're looking for. But if you don't see head here, that means it continues on to the other page. So it should be highlighted. It's not highlighted down here, but I'm not sure. Maybe I can find it. I'm not sure why I highlighted that group because that's not the right group. So you run into that sometimes. Sometimes you have to go back a page or forward a page in the census to find the right people that you're looking for. That's kind of what Ancestry looks like. Ancestry is pretty easy to find records in. You can do, you can search this way by census, voter list, marriage and death records, military, immigration. You can also go to the card catalog. And this is useful if you're looking for, say you're just looking for North Carolina records. And you type in North Carolina, that will give you all the record groups with North Carolina in the title. So you can search record groups without having to, like if you're looking for a birth index for say 1770, it's not going to be in this one because that one starts 1865. So sometimes you have to kind of go through and look at your record groups to see if the dates match up to what you're looking for. And sometimes you can eliminate, just by eliminating what's available, it can save you a lot of time in your genealogy searching. I wanted to show you how to find genealogy records on Family Search because it can be a little bit tricky because they've got, you can search records and then they're more geared to having search by a name, but you can also go to find a collection this way, but it's all alphabetical. So, but if you click on census list, and then see, these will give you other census lists from other countries, which is really neat. Some of the colonial records sometimes go back to like England or Spain because they were like the trade census information. But if you type in United States, you'll get the mortality schedule. And on the slave schedule, there's a merchant seaman one from 1930. And then here's all the federal censuses here. And they come up very similar to, I don't know if it's anything. These will come up looking a lot like So you can go through and find the record that you're looking for. And this one, you can see the person over here. You can see all the information that's transcribed here. And then you can also click on the image. This one doesn't highlight it though, so you've got to actually go through. Look, see how it's hard to read because that's here's the one. And then they have them indexed over here as well. So I don't see him on this page. He might be on a different page. I'm not gonna take time to find him on here, but that's what the census looks like on this one. And you have this one, it doesn't like list them up above like Ancestry does. So you have to kind of zoom in to actually read what's on these. And you can actually get blank census records. So if you have a census and it's not scanned very well and you really can't read what this column says, you can find the blank ones. And then you can actually just look those up and it will tell you what that column means, because sometimes they're just not very legible. And then here is, this is what My Heritage looks like. And this one also has a census and voter list. And you can, I believe, 1950, 1940, and then you just click over here to more, and then you can search. We can go to show all. It should pick up all the different censuses here. Oops. There's the 1900 federal census, and then you have to put a name in to I just want to show you what this this one comes up. It has a little bit information here. Now it says New York, Pittsburgh. So each database is going to be a little bit different. It's going to have, oh, that's going to be some first place already. That's my bad. Be careful where you put your information in, because that will affect your search results, of course. So here is, so this one has a little bit more information up here. It has the enumeration district, the family number, the ward. So that's important if you want to look at the enumeration maps. But this is how it looks. You can expand it out here. And then this one's pretty clear. Let's see. It's around here. Yeah, sometimes you have to search around on the census reference, but this one, that one has a good scan on it. So each database, if you don't find your records on one database, go search another one, because you never know how it's transcribed. You don't know what record groups they've been able to scan. Maybe they scanned something that another database didn't scan. So you just never know what you're going to find. So that's a Heritage Quest. I can show you Heritage Quest. Here's Heritage Quest. So this is the one that's NC Live. So if your library has NC Live, you'll have access to this. And this is great because it's broken down right here into a census map guide. Here's the Indian census rolls. Then you have mortality schedules. These are the agricultural and industrial schedules. And then this is the U.S. Freedmen's Bank records. So those are very, very useful. You can search U.S. Census down here. They've also got you can search books. So you can put your ancestor's name in and see if they're listed in any books. or publications. You can also click down here to look for each census record on its by year. This one doesn't have any collection information. It's got some search tips over here. I'm not going to take time to show you what that looks like, but it's pretty simple. It's a pretty basic interface and it works pretty well. So we're going to leave the census and we're going to go to the United States Social Security Administration. These are very, they're mostly indexed information. It's not going to give you a whole lot of information, but it's great if if you can't find a birth record or a death record on one of your ancestors, this is going to give you that information. So the Social Security Administration was created in 1935. And the first wave of applicants are identified on the Social Security Death Index as receiving the number before 1951. Records can provide their full name, their birth date, and place where they were born, their parents and spouse information. They don't all include that information, but they can for sure. 1939, the records were expanded to include spouses and minor children. 1954 was the Information of Disability Program for workers and families. 1962 was the beginning of the Social Security Death Index. In 1965, Medicare was signed into law. In 1972, any alien legally admitted to the U.S. is issued a Social Security number and required to provide their age and alien status. So those are, you really can only get Social Security records for deceased individuals. You can't get them for people who are alive currently. So that's just something to be aware of. So the Social Security Death Index is issued it's an index of all people issued a Social Security number and whose death has been reported to the Social Security Administration from 1962 to present. So anybody before 1962 up to, I believe it may be just, I'm sorry, I have to fix my lights again. I apologize. Sorry, I can't see anything in the dark. It does not include all people who have received survivor benefits, but the database does hold 94 million records, which is a good amount of records to be searching for ancestors. And again, the information may include their given name, their surname, their date of death, date of birth, last known residence, location of last benefit, date and place of issuance, and their Social Security number. You don't always find their Social Security number. MyHeritage and Family Search do not include Social Security numbers. Ancestry provides them before 2004, and Find My Past provides them through 2012. And I remember these are all for people who are deceased. It's not for people who are living. And of course, that's for privacy reasons. This is what an ancestry Social Security Death Index looks like. This is for my other grandfather, and this has his social number and birth date. See, this was before 1951. Issued Massachusetts, his last residence was New Hampshire, and his death date. So it's not all the information that could be listed on there, but that's a gold mine for genealogists because you've got birth date, death date, where their Social Security card was issued, and their last residence. So that's pretty good information. Of course, and this looks like this when there's no record to look at because it's just an index information. And then Social Security Applications and Claims Index. This is a database that contains extracts of claims filed for disability and retirement benefits, death claims for survivor benefits, applications for new cards, applications for changes to Social Security cards, and this index contains about 49 million records. So it's not as many as the Social Security Death Index, but it's still a good amount of records. It does say it provides more detail. It did say on the National Archives that it provides more details than the Social Security Death Index, but not everyone on the Social Security Death Index is listed in this Applications and Claims Index. I have my grandfather's on here. It does not have as much information as the death index, but it's going to vary by person. This one has the same information, except this also has a claim date for his, which I believe that's when he started using his Social Security, because I think that's when he turned 62. No, and then again, this one doesn't have an image because it's just an index. So this is all just transcribed from the index information. And then there's also Numident, which was created to track down or to track U.S. workers' earnings, so their benefits could be determined. It only contains information on deceased individuals, and the information was collected from Social Security applications, Social Security claims, and the Social Security death index. So this is kind of it's kind of like it's got all three of the other or the claims and applications index and the death index kind of combined into this. So this is what it looks like from Family Search. I found this one on Family Search. And this one has pretty much the same information as the death index. It has this, that's the social program claim date and then social program correspondence. So that, yeah. And that is the year that he turned 62. So I'm pretty sure that's what that was from. And then if you really want to see an ancestor's Social Security application, there is a way to access their original Social Security application. You have to really have a lot of information. If your ancestor doesn't appear in the Social Security death index, then you have to provide proof of death. So you have to have like a death certificate, a statement from the funeral director, attending physician, or any of that other information in order to be able to access that information. And you basically have to do a Freedom of Information Act request. And this is the form. You go to Social Security forms. This is on the Social Security website. And I just went under forms. And then the actual form number is SSA 711. And it's request for deceased individual Social Security record. And this will tell you exactly how to go about getting that information, how much it costs. If the Social Security number of deceased individuals provided, the fee is $27. If it's not provided, it's still $27. So that's, and that's a photocopy. And then for computer extract, it's a little bit less, but this is how you would get that information. And then if you don't have proof of death, then the Social Security Administration will only release these application records for people who were born over 120 years ago. So it'd be people who were born like 1905 and before. And the information on the original application was often communicated directly by the ancestor or their parents. So you'll have, usually it's pretty good information that's on the original application. Sometimes if someone's applying for a benefit, they might not have all the information. So if you're getting it from the application index, then it may not have all the information that could be on the original application. So that's why sometimes it's good to get that application information. And then for U.S. immigration and naturalization records, immigration has changed a lot in the United States over the many, many years we've been a country. But naturalization is the process by which an alien or an undocumented migrant becomes an American citizen. Prior to September of 1906, any court of record could grant United States citizenship. Naturalization records from state and local courts are often at the state archives or a county historical society, depending on their relationship with the county or the local courts. No central index exists. Documentation of immigrants varied between 1789 and 1819. Customs controlled the forts, and some of them were better than others at keeping records or keeping ship manifests. That wasn't required, so it wasn't something that they just did automatically. The Steerage Act of 1819 changed that, and it required ship manifests. And it required that people coming in had to match what was, when a ship has a manifest, they have a manifest for when they ship out and when they arrive. And what's arriving has to match what was on the manifest from what shipped out. So those manifests started to be kept. So that's how we have all these records now of immigration. And that's also a lot of people, and I'll say this and it may be controversial, but it's a widely thought of that immigrants had their names changed at like Ellis Island, but that wasn't the case because their names had to match what was on the manifest. So if it was changed, it may have been changed on the ship manifest when they left their point of origin, but a lot of times people there wasn't standardized spelling. Sometimes people anglicize their name just because it was easier to get by. But yeah, that's just a little bit of genealogy facts there. And then the Immigration Act of 1891 required documentation of immigration from Mexico and Canada. And it's interesting, from Canada, a lot of people that were coming to the United States, coming to Boston was more expensive than coming into Canada. And they realized that a lot of people were coming into Canada and then coming through immigration through land route to into the United States. So they had been missing a lot of immigration into the United States through Canada because it was just less expensive. I mean, if you're on your last few dollars, you're going to try to be frugal as much as you can. So coming to Canada was probably a little bit of a better deal. So other records that you can get for naturalization and immigration records is certificate of arrival, declaration of intention, petition for naturalization, oath of allegiance, and the certificate of citizenship or certificate of naturalization. Prior to 1991, the federal courts, these records are at the National Archives. In most cases, the declaration of intention and petition for naturalization, but not the certificate of citizenship. That was, there were two copies of those, and one is held by Immigration and Naturalization, which is now the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and one was given to the new citizen. So you won't find the certificate of citizenship online. But I can show you, this is my grandfather, this is my father's father, and this is his certificate of arrival. And this was issued April 26, 1933, even though he came in 1928. I believe in this period of time, there's through the years, there's been different year requirements on when they could become a citizen. And I believe in the 30s, it was like you had to be here 5 years, which is much different than it is today. I'm always amazed when people say, oh, my ancestors came here legally. And I'm like, well, yeah, it was a lot easier. It's a lot easier back in the day than it is now. So I think people sometimes fail to realize that. But anyway, so this is certificate of arrival. And then this is what a declaration of intention looks like. He was 24 at this time. Let's see. And it has, he came from County Roscommon in Ireland, and this shows where he was living in Rossmore Road in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. And he came from Queenstown, Ireland on the Coronia. Yeah. And then this is the petition for citizenship. And I'm not sure this might have his immigration number on it, I'm not sure. And then this is what the oath of allegiance looks like. So these are pretty much what you're going to find in an immigration file for an ancestor. If you're lucky enough to find it. I just found I had the second two, but I didn't have the first and the last form. I just found these on My Heritage, which I was very excited about. And then, all right, did I find them on My Heritage? I might find them on Ancestry. But this ship manifest I did find on My Heritage. This one, I'm going to show you this one because it has so much information on it. It's crazy. And then let me go back here. I'm going to go to My Heritage. I'll go to immigration. So I clicked on immigration and it didn't find anything. So I came over here and did immigration and travel. And this is how I found it here. This is what the, so it has, he was male, he was born in 1905, he arrived 1928. Here's the Coronia. So that was his departure. But then if you click on the actual document, it has so much information. So here he is. Head tax status, I'm not sure. But here's his family name, Feeney, given name James. He was 23, male, single, farmer, can read, can speak English, write English, Irish free, FS stands for Free State. Race is Irish, country Ireland, city or town Dysart, immigration visa number, issued at Dublin on the day of December 1928. His last permanent residence was Ireland, Yvonne. And then over here, it has, so this is address of nearest relative or friend. So it has his father was T. Feeney, Middletown. So then you got all this information about where his father was living. And then also final destination. And then they're having a ticket to reach final destination, yes. And he was passage paid by self. He had whether in possession of 100 and or whether in possession of $50, I think, and if less, how much? So he had $25. So whether ever built before in the United States, no. And then going to join a relative or friend. So then it has his aunt and has her information and her address. And then let's see. The purpose of coming to the United States. And whether they intend to return, no, permanent. So they're coming here permanently. Whether the alien intends to become a citizen, yes. So there's a lot of great information, whether a polygamist or an anarchist. I guess that is important to know. Never in we are ever in prison. So this is a lot of biographical information that is informative. But for genealogy, knowing who they were going to stay with and who their living relative was but that's a lot of great information for a genealogy record right there. So, for naturalization and immigration records, there is basic information needed for successful naturalization request. You can request information for deceased people, but if someone's living and they have a naturalization record, they have to actually do the request. So there's a whole process. This is the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services website. So you have to search an index for, they have to actually get you their index number. So this is what the online search request is for here. And I believe there is a payment schedule on here, and I believe that it's like $30 for online search, and I think it's $70 for mail-in, I think. But you can also check the case status. Of the information. So here's requesting records. So you can do certificate files, you can do alien registration forms, you can do visa files, registry files, and then it has this whole, do you have a file number? Yes, no. And then how to get to, there's also, name changes. So this is just some good information about like people's names. If their names are spelled differently, it might be an issue. So and then there's also alien files and alien registration files. So the Alien Registration Act of 1940 required all non-citizens living and arriving in the United States to register their status with the government. It's not an official arrival record, but these registrations documented individuals who've been living in the U.S. for decades. So that was important information to have. Information was gathered through a questionnaire, so it can contain a good amount of biographical information. 5.6 million non-citizens were registered between August 1st, 1940 and March 31st, 1944. And then starting in April of 1944, the alien registration files turned into alien files. And they were created by INS and contain information on any active case by individuals passing through immigration and inspection process. And those are now with the other office. This office, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I can talk today. And then these are some of the resources that I used in my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I guess we can wait till after Jennifer does her part. Or we can take a break.
I'm okay if anybody wants to ask some questions while they're fresh on their mind, and then also, yeah, maybe we could do like a 5-minute break to give you guys a breather. If that sounds good to everyone. Someone asked if you could put the resources list back on the screen.
Oh yeah, and I can share it. Anyone who wants this presentation, you're welcome. I'll share it with anybody. I am totally okay with that.
Do you guys want to come back at 2:15? That'll be like a 6-minute break. Get up to get a drink, use the bathroom, stretch your legs, and then we can start part 2. And then in the meantime, you can ask questions. If you want to ask questions in the chat or anything like that, we can answer.
Oh, there's some messages. Oh, I see. Okay, there it is. Sorry, I kind of went through that really I wanted to make sure there was enough time. If anybody wants me to show them how to find any other records, like the immigration records or anything, or the Social Security Death Index or anything, I'm happy to go back over that. I didn't want to take too much time because I knew we wanted to kind of have a little break, but I love to show people how to get to all these records. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, from Family Search, if you want to get to the wiki, you go to search and then you go here to research wiki. Sorry, I wasn't very clear about that. I think it should be available from recording because we are recording it. So is that right, Nicole or Marlene? Yes. Okay. Thanks. Yay.
And I'll give my slides to Marlena too to go out.
We have a question in the chat. I don't know if y'all see it, Karen or Jennifer.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now.
Okay.
Under terms of ancestry and citizenship. One of the hardest things to recreate as a search when you find records on I have my notes, but they're on the slide. I can't. Okay, so a district court document says date of naturalization 1902. So the court issued them naturalization 1902, which they did until 1906. The other one says date certificate issued also from U.S. District Court 1955. So I don't know why they would issue them another one in 1955. Because naturalization is the same as citizenship. Once they issue, unless, I don't know, it's hard to say without.
Do you know who they married? Because the law changed at different times. So sometimes like, okay, if it was like one partner was a citizen and the other one wasn't, sometimes, you could apply for citizenship, but then sometimes the law would change. And if you married someone who was a non-citizen, you could lose your own citizenship. Like I know at one particular point, it was like if women married, if an American woman citizen married a non-citizen, even if they were going to reside in the United States, she would lose her American citizenship and she would have to reapply. I don't think that's true at that late. But I know that there was a point in time, and like Karen said, immigration laws, it changed. Like there was the point where the records were actually at the state level. So it was a state court that did it. So you got yeah. I have no easy answer for you, but some weird things could have happened there. I wonder like if there could have been something to do with Social Security, because in 1902 there was no Social Security system, so they may have had a certificate of naturalization, but then come 1955, maybe they were trying to do something to do with Social Security or get a Social Security number, and then they may have said, well, hey, your certificate isn't good enough, or the law changed, so now you need to reapply. That's a possibility, or maybe they couldn't find the original record at that time. It looks like you were able to find it or had a copy of it. Let's see. They applied 1928 of intention from 19. So they have a certificate. They have a court. You have a court. What's the court document? I'm wondering. Is that the actual naturalization court document, like the certificate? Or what it was it like regarding some other court case? And then they said that they naturalized in 1902.
Person applied in 1928. Declaration of intention from 1928. Okay. Huh.
Because it sounds like maybe the original was not like something like even though it said that there was a court document saying they naturalized in 1902, it sounds like something happened and they didn't. It just has an alien registration number and a date for certification.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the declaration of intention, but then they still have to do the that petition for citizenship. So maybe that wasn't processed. And then maybe they did that in 1955.
Yeah, because the alien registration number isn't the doesn't mean they naturalized.
Yeah.
It just means that, yeah, like Karen saying they registered.
That could be one of the
okay.
AR numbers from 1940 or after 1940. Because they had to register, even if they were like whether they were documented or undocumented, whether they were citizen, not citizen. So they could be like in the process of obtaining citizenship, but if they weren't a citizen in 1940, they still would have had to register, whether they were undocumented or documented. So maybe that was from the alien registration. Because they hadn't fully gone through the whole process, maybe. She might have not received citizenship, or maybe she did in 1955. Was that what, or is 1955 the alien registration? She might not have received citizenship. I mean, there may have been something in her documentation or something that was missing in her application that they might not have been able to process it through. I can't find my grandmother. I put my grandfather's on here because I found his, but I can't find my grandmother's, but I'm pretty sure she became a citizen, but I don't know because I can't find her. It drives me crazy. I think, see, I found all this and I think this was on My Heritage. Look at that, our family search. Let's see if I can, I'm gonna stop sharing for a sec. I can look at my notes. It was Family Search, so I found that on the Family Search database. Migration, Massachusetts, United States Naturalization Record, 1790 to 1991. So that was, and then I found the ship manifest on My Heritage. So I just want to say I love Family Search because they make all that information free, and it's just amazing.
And I put my email in the chat too. So if look, it might be helpful to look at the documents. So if you even want to send me copies of the documents, I can look at them and see if I can, because I think I'm getting a little confused about which document had had what information on it. So I don't want to give you wrong information. And also, like, I know some people, I know some people, it sounds like I'm off here or something. So I know some different, like, professional genealogists. So if I can't answer, I could probably get the answer for you on somebody who, like, specializes in immigration. I could be like, hey, what does this mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, data certification would suggest it's some kind of, it's either certificate of citizenship or certificate of naturalization. So
If you guys are ready, Karen, or do you have anything else you want to add? I don't want to
No, I did.
cut you
I
off.
blabbed all about all my stuff already.
No, that was great. Thank you.
I like
Um,
talking about records and genealogy. I love it. It's great.
okay, so I'm gonna get started. I feel like mine's the more boring part because it's pretty dense. But all right, let's see here. Let me tell this to show you guys in from the beginning. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? It- or the presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I have thumbs up. Great. Okay, so the main body of records that I'm going to talk about today is the congressional serial set. And at the end, I am going to talk briefly about the Freedmen's Bureau records. There was a lot more I wanted to put in this presentation, but as you know, Karen said, there's so much to talk about. I was like, oh, I just can't do this to these people. They're going to be like, when is this presentation going to end? There's too much. So I wanted to talk about specifically about military records separately, but there just wasn't room for it. So maybe like we can do a follow-up presentation or something in the future for other record groups because you know there's so many federal records that it just makes it really difficult to cover everything. So I wanted to make sure that I covered something that people I think don't usually think of when they're doing this kind of research. And I think the reason they don't think about it is because it can be kind of a complex body of records. And in the past, it was kind of hard to get to them because you had to look at the print volumes. So we'll talk about here in a second, like the extent to what these records are and the different ways you can access them and what might be in them. But I think some things to think about when you think about, you know, how to find your ancestor in federal records is first of all to think about how they may have interacted because federal records, most of them are very functional. And so you have to think about like what function would the government have served for your person? Like how would they have had any kind of like financial interactions, any legal interactions? You know, it's based on the function of the office. And so by doing that, by kind of thinking outside of the box, and that way it'll help you start kind of pinpointing like, oh, they probably, you know, had something to do with taxes or they were in the military. So it would have been these types of records they would have interacted with. You know, they got in trouble with the law and, you know, there was a federal offense. So maybe it was this type. We won't get into like criminal records, like federal judicial records and things like that. We won't get into the nitty gritty of those today, but that's just sort of how you have to think is like, what could this person have done that would make them show up in some kind of federal record? And even if they were an employee, and we'll talk about lists of employees and where you can find those at. If they were, you heard that, oh, they worked in the post office, they were the postmaster. There is like a whole thing with lists of people who were postmasters and or worked for the post office and that lists all that information, how much money they made and what post office they were assigned to, which is also nice because especially if you're looking at the census and it lists a location and you're like, where is this location? I've never heard of it. Go to the post office list and look and see, like, is this listed there? Like, you know, sometimes these small communities would have their own little post office. And so maybe the location no longer shows up on the map because they don't call it that anymore, or Google Maps decided for whatever reason to delete it, or they renamed it the Gulf of America. Who knows? But for whatever reason, the name may have changed. And so you can kind of look at those old lists and see like, oh, okay, that was a community that was here. I know that one census, it showed up on the census as this in my home state of Kentucky. It was like a little community called Pogo. And I'm like, where the heck is Pogo? And then I looked in the post office list and sure enough, Pogo had its own little postal office. So that can be kind of helpful. Also check your dates. And we were just talking about immigration records, and I was talking about, oh, sometimes they were with the state, and then Karen was talking about the different times things happen, because government changes over time, especially when you're looking at like the early time periods. You start at like the beginning of the government in the late 1700s, you're coming all the way up to 2025. Government entities changed. The structure, the legalities, how things were processed, how things were done changed. And you will see how that's really important to think about when I start talking about the congressional serial set, because it's like, okay, who would have looked into this? Who would have done this? If somebody was making a request or an appeal about their pension or something, or was asking the government for money, who were they asking? Why were they asking this committee? Why were they asking this person? And so that's and what office would you look into? So that's what you're looking for, is like the government structure at the time period that you're looking at with your ancestor, and that'll help you figure out where exactly you need to go to look for those records. So a really great place when you're looking for congressional records or want to read about them or their history is A Century of Lawmaking for a New Nation. It's a site that the Library of Congress has done. Now, this has been around a really long time. It did not have as many digitized images as it does now. Now it has like a lot of stuff online, but previously it had like a picture of Lady Liberty holding the torch, if you've seen the old version of the site. So I guess I've been around a long time, because I'm like, oh, this is the new version of the site. But the actual content and material has been around a long time. And it's really nice because they really break down what all these government documents are and what they're used for. You can see like there's the journals of the Continental Congress. They have the records for the journals of the Confederate States of America. So they have really detailed information about each body of records. And then they have, like I said, some of them are digitized. So the ones we're going to particularly look at today are the American State Papers and the Congressional Serial Set. These two are kind of wedded together because they are similar kind of documents. I listed American State Papers first, but I want to say that this was actually published after the Congressional Serial Set. Because when they started publishing the Congressional Serial Set, they started from like, oh, today we're gonna, this Congress that we're in right now we're gonna publish their documents, and we're gonna put them in this order, and we're gonna get them out there. We want to make sure people have access. Well, at a certain point, they were like, oh, wait a minute, we skipped the first 14 Congresses. We do not have their documents published. So maybe we should go back and get these organized and also publish them, because this is working so great that we're publishing the current one. So in 1831, they started arranging and publishing the first 14 Congress's records. And so it's from 1789 to 1838. It's the legislative and executive documents and materials. And at this time, it did include the House and Senate journals. And the House and Senate journals, what they are is like sort of the daily workings of what's going on in those Congresses. So it's like, okay, this is what we did today. This is the discussion we had. These are the bills we looked at. So they're pretty detailed. At different times, it was and wasn't included in the papers. So at one point they did start just completely cutting them out and then printing them separately, because the congressional serial set was already getting so big, and the volumes were so huge for each Congress that they were like, we can't put all this stuff in the material. And you'll see that as I'm talking, like I'll talk about the different kinds of committees and records in there. And again, at different times, they might have the postal records in there, and then they decided, okay, we're going to take the postal lists out because this is too huge. There's too many post offices. That could be a separate thing, or we're just going to quit printing that. So keep that in mind, that if you, for example, I keep using the post office, but if your ancestor was a postal worker and you're like, well, they weren't in here, I did a name search and could not find them. It's not that they were not a postal worker. It could be that that was a year that they decided, hey, we're not going to include the postal list in here anymore because this is way too much. So, okay, so that's kind of like the format of how these are set up. Like I said, these were published after the current records, even though they came before them. And because they did them retroactively, and I'm talking specifically about the American State Papers, because they did this retroactively, they were able to look at this and say, what would be the best way to arrange these documents? So what they did is they arranged them into 10 different topics. They did foreign relations, Indian affairs, finances, commerce and navigation, military affairs, naval affairs, post office, public lands, land claims, and then they had a miscellaneous. And so the American State Papers themselves are 38 volumes, around 6,278 documents, and they do have an index. I do apologize if my slides end up being a little text heavy. That is on purpose because I wanted you all to, be able to have this for a reference besides just me talking. So that is why you have lots of text to stare at. So the old way of accessing this is you would have had to go to the index and you would have had to look up like the topic or the name, and then you would have had to go to one of the paper volumes and then try to find them in there. You also could browse. So you could go like, for example, the post office, you could go to the volumes that covered that, and then you could browse through it. So this is a copy of the table of contents from the public lands volume from the American State Papers. And usually each publication would have had a title. So you can see here, it's really kind of hard to read, but there are titles listed through here, and it tells you in which volume number and then what page you're going to find that on. And then here's the index to public lands. So here they are indexing by name. It was funny, I was looking at one of the indexes and I was like, oh, this is really great. Look at all these names. And then it was something to do with naval stuff. And then I realized, oh, these aren't people's names. These are actually the name of steamer ships. So make sure that when you're looking at a name, it's like, it could be a ship because there are ship records in here because look at the time period. So even if it's not related to the war, you're going to see things about ships. You'll also see in this index, very interestingly enough, right here is a woman listed, and I didn't look this entry up, but I would be really curious to see what this record's about. It says public lands, so she might be trying to make some kind of land claim, but is a free woman of color, Angelique Ori or Aubrey, I think Ori. So there are free people of color in here. There are references to enslaved people. I have an example in here that's a really interesting one. But looking for information about like indigenous people, enslaved people, things like that. A lot of it is you're going to find more things to do with a group of people like the Cherokee, the Catawba. You're going to see laws being passed. Trail of Tears, it's documented in here because, it went through Congress and they said, hey, you shouldn't do this. And Andrew Jackson said, I'm going to do this anyway. So all of that story is told in the documents in the the American State Papers. Well, some of the, other stuff is in the American State Papers, but those kind of historic stories and then the congressional serial set, they document all those things, all those decisions that Congress made, because again, these are their journals are in here, different laws that they passed and committee reports. And a little bit of discussion of the specific committee discussions. A lot of times they're just giving the report to Congress. They're giving sort of the summation. It is not they're not going to tell the entire story of what's going on. So this is a starting off point where if you find some really interesting things that a committee was doing or they mention your ancestor, you can then go and request the actual minutes or report like more detailed information of the committee from the National Archives, because a lot of these committees have their own papers. And so this is kind of like the starting off point. So the American State Papers are digitized on A Century of Lawmaking for a New Nation. I do not have a lot of luck searching on this site. I think it's difficult to do like name searches, but they are there. The other place where you will find the American State Papers digitized is the Haughty Trust. So they are also there. I think there's some restrictions if you are not like a member institution. There are some downloading restrictions on this, but you can search through them. And I did practice and kind of play around with it. They are also in the Internet Archive. So, I sometimes I find the Internet Archive kind of hard to search like a body of records. Like, so there's 38 volumes of these. Make sure you have the titles correct. Once you find a volume, you can search within it, which makes it a little bit easier. But this can be a little bit difficult. So the congressional serial set is, like I said, this is the kind of partner to the American State Papers, and it began publication before the American State Papers. It started with the 15th Congress, and you can actually read, I think the act is in here where it says, hey, we got all these really important papers. We better get it together and get these organized and actually put these out. And again, like later they decide, oh, those other papers were important too. We better get those together. So it began publication in 1817 with the 15th Congress and the first session. There are over 17,000 bound paper volumes to this collection. It is huge, 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 huge. Not one institution owns the entire collection, not even the Library of Congress. I know that the Library of Congress has a huge collection. In the law section, and NARA has a huge collection. But we have these depositories, government depositories that hold different government records. And so I know that a lot of the volumes are kind of spread out across the US on and who holds them. I think UNC Chapel Hill has a huge collection. We had a huge collection at one point. We are a depository, but I don't think we hold any of the print volumes anymore. So it is a large mass of records. There is a comprehensive index that was done. It was the paper index. This is the way that you were able to access this information before, they could digitize it. It's the Congressional Information. I wrote this down so I got the name right. I think it's the Congressional Information Service Serial Sets Index, and it covers from 1789 to 1969. There are other indexes out there. There were a couple of individuals who did like really specific indexes, like for the land entries, and some genealogists who pulled out certain information and indexed it for records they thought that would help with genealogy. I'm not going to go into like all the different indexes because there are a lot of them. The National Archives has a really good article about the Congressional Serial Set where they actually break down, they have a whole list of the different indexes and what they might be able to help you find. And like I said, these have the House and Senate documents and reports, the legislative and executive publications. And again, a large portion of the journals for the House and Senate are included in here. So this is the GPO's website, the Government Publication Office Gov Info, and they are actually digitizing. They're going back and digitizing copies of the books, and with partnership with some other institutions. You can see that this set was digitized by the Law Library of Congress. I don't find this website very easy to use. And they are not completely done. And it kind of looks like they are because they have the years listed and then they have different books under, but there's a blog that you can find where it tells you the percentage. And I think they're about 60% done digitizing these. Because one thing is, it's not even just like, okay, we're digitizing these. They have to find the volumes because, like I said, not one institution has all of these volumes because there's 17,000. So they have to get the volumes, locate them, bring them and borrow them, and then scan them and then return them. And so it's kind of a slow process. I also want to say, I'm not trying to get political, but I do want to say that it is factual that information is being taken offline. And I don't know if any of the information or sources that I talk about today, if any of this will be taken offline at any point. I also don't know if funding will continue for some of these projects. I don't think Library of Congress has had any cuts so far, but I do want to keep you all to keep that in mind, that if today I show you something and then tomorrow you go look at it and it's not there, it is possible that it was taken offline. So a lot of the genealogy use that you find in this material is going to be the private laws. And what are private laws? Especially private laws versus public laws. So what private laws are is a law that would be passed that would actually affect a person or a like small group of people who are named, or even a corporation like a small business, and they're seeking some relief or something from the government. A private law could be passed that would give them that. So why would you need a private law? Well, if the government did you bad, if they did something, or um, there was an exception that needs to be made to a specific law, and I'll show you some examples here in a minute. You could ask Congress, you could petition Congress and say, hey, I think the government owes me money, or the government owes me something. It's a way that they can redress issues, and I wrote this down, so I'll just read it. They redress issues like the government owing someone money if the law already didn't exist that would give them that money or give them relief. Or if the treasurer or another federal office, like if you had already went to the treasurer about your pension and they said, no, you're not getting this, or no, we're not going to make this exception for you. For a lot of times during these years, there was no judiciary way to appeal. Like you could not sue or go in front of the court and say, hey, I want to appeal this. There was no appeal process in place. So the only way that you could do that is you had to go to Congress and ask. And the Constitution actually says that you have permission to address Congress and ask for, if the government has done some harm to you, to ask for relief, to ask for them to fix it. So they had to make a mechanism where there was no judiciary to do it through. So, hey, you got to come to Congress, and these certain committees would hear your complaint, request, whatever it was, and then they would give you a decision. So that is what there is a lot of the information in the congressional serial set. That's a lot of what would help you genealogically, is what came out of these appeals or these asks. Now, I also wanted to show you that, I showed you before that Haughty Trust had American State Papers. It also has the congressional serial set, as you can see on here. Again, not great to search function. And then the Internet Archives also has the congressional serial set, different volumes. I do not think they have the complete set, but I'm pretty sure they don't have the complete set, but they do have some on there. So who has the complete set? What's the easiest way to access this? Well, we have at ECU a subscription to the U.S. Congressional Serial Set, digitized by RedX. And I think that RedX is owned by ProQuest now. Or no, I'm sorry, Newsbank. It says it right there, Division of Newsbank. I don't think that was always true, but I think that's true now, that they're owned by Newsbank. So, but they have digitized all of the American State Papers and the U.S. Congressional Serial Set, and it makes it so much easier. Like you can just do a name search in here. And to be honest, all the examples that I have from today, I used the paid version. I always want to show you the free versions, but this is the paid version. There are also select record sets that have been pulled out. Family Search has, I think, with the American State Papers, the public claims, I think they have pulled those out, and you can search those, and they have digitized some of those volumes. So different places on the internet, you will find different specific bodies of these records that have been pulled out. The census, the Indian rolls, all of those are actually part of the U.S. Congressional Serial Set. They were published into it. So if you look through those, you will find those in there. So, and I mentioned a while ago, the private laws, but then I didn't really go into the public laws. The public laws are the ones that are going to affect everyone. Those are going to be least likely to have information about the individual people, but sometimes they might have something in there, especially if they're passing a law like to do with the pension or something that might be helpful for you read the original material to find exactly what it says and who it was covered. The other place where you can get the U.S. congressional serial set online with subscription is Hein Online. That we don't have. I'm pretty sure we don't have this at ECU, but other institutions might have it. I think all the state schools are like this in the UNC system. We have to allow some access to our computers to the public since we are state funded. So in the North Carolina collection, we have 2 computers set up in here that anyone can come in and use those computers. And so they can use our databases. I know downstairs you can get a guest pass and use the computers. I think it's for like 1 hour and they have limited printing abilities, but there is that possibility that you can come in and you can do that. Probably the state law, there's a law library at the state capitol, and I think I'm going to say more than likely they do have one of these, and you could probably go in there. I don't know for sure. I don't work there, but there are possibilities for you to actually use some of these subscription databases to access those records. The other place where, I said specific sets have been pulled out. I did want to mention this. The other place is Heritage Quest, and Karen mentioned Heritage Quest. So if you're in a library in North Carolina, you should have access to Heritage Quest because, it's through NC Live. And she showed you that format, like she showed you the front page and how you can go into the different record sets. Well, U.S. Serial Set is one of those, but it only covers memorials, petitions, and private relief actions of the U.S. Congress. So this kind of goes along with those private laws. How did you get a private law passed for yourself where you were going to get something? Well, you could file a memorial petition or a private relief action. And memorials, that's kind of a funny thing. I remember at one point I thought, oh, you want somebody to put up a memorial about you. And, like, oh, Jennifer Daugherty, the NC collection librarian, I want a memorial. That's not what they mean by memorial. It's actually a legal term. And some things I saw said that it was a request for action. So it's sort of like a document requesting an action be taken. Other things have read said it was more like a memorandum, like I'm just providing you with information. And I've seen both. Like I've seen ones that were memorials where they were kind of just giving Congress information about something that like a case that was already going on. And I've seen memorials where they're like, hey, here's a bunch of information, but now I want you to do this. But it's different than a petition. And so the petition is very much, hey, this has happened to me, and I think the government's responsible, and I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And then the private relief action is kind of like that too. Like, I missed the deadline for filing for a pension. I really think this pension should be given to me. I know that the law doesn't allow for that, so I'm asking you to fix this for me and give me this pension. And so this is an easy place to search those things. You can do it by name, place name, keywords. And so this is if you don't want to wrestle with the larger database or you don't have a good way to access the full congressional serial set, you can come to smaller databases like this that have pulled some of the records out. So in the private claims, memorials, and petitions, and this is not like in a section. So like in the American State Papers, they had land claims, like, that was separated. They had a whole section to do with land. This is not like this. The way the congressional serial set is organized is it is actually sequential by publication number. So, and that usually kind of works out chronologically. So as publications for the House and Senate were produced, or the executive branch, they gave them a publication number, and then they were compiled and they were published. So things are all over the place within that. It's spread out. You do not have specific sections that cover specific topics. So that's where the indexes really help and come into play, because otherwise this is such a dense body of material. It just makes it really difficult for you to get into it and look for things. And a lot of things just fell under the General Claims Committee. So if you were, making a petition, it might end up going to the General Claims Committee, and the House and Senate both had their own. One had started in 1794 to 1946. The other one, the Senate, started in 1816 to 1946. Underneath those committees, there are all kinds of other committees. And if your claim was about a specific thing, it did not go to the General Claims Committee. It was routed to one of these other types of committees. They did at one point have private land claims committee. And they called them committees on. So a committee on private land claims, a committee on Revolutionary War claims, committee on pensions, which is different than the committee on military pensions. And then there was a committee on invalid pensions that had to do with the military. So that's just a few examples of the types of committees, but there were a ton of them. And then later they were taken over by judiciary committees of both bodies, that there were judiciary committees that were formed. I haven't outlined it, but if you go to National Archives, it is a great resource. There are a couple of different articles on there where they talk about what committees covered what during what time periods. And, I talked about government structure. So the committees kind of reflect that. They changed depending on the government structure as well. And I did want to mention that, the online, you can see that the index goes up to the 60s. Some of the online sources, they go up to 1994. The reason why the print doesn't go up much farther, they're not digitizing, is because basically they stopped publishing these as part of the serial set. So as of 2014, the government publishing office basically has ceased and desist from doing these as compiled volumes. On the GPO site, it's not that these materials are not being produced like the House and Senate Journal, it's that they're actually putting them up digitally directly on the GPO site. And so I know you can go right on the GPO site and search some of this stuff. The other thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of information in some of these claims, a lot of personal information. One thing that they did do, and especially on some of the lists to do with military, is they did go back and redact some of the names and reports and pulled them out of the congressional serial set because they were too much personal information is provided. They still do this. The government does this now. My disclaimer, I'm not a government documents librarian, but I know that from talking to other government documents librarians, they have received things from the government saying, we need you to pull this out of your repository. We're redacting it, or we're taking it out and deleting it. So that did happen to some of the records that they felt that they were giving too much information. I think at one point they released something that had social security numbers on it. And then later they were like, oh, we need to take that out because we can't give people's information like that, or it had birthdays on it. So that is another thing, is if you're well, I heard about this group of records or this information or this report that was supposed to be in there, why is it no longer in there? It's because it may have been redacted by the government, retracted by the government, or asked for some of the information on it to be redacted. So keep that in mind, that at different points they did come and pull information out. So I wanted to show you some examples of the things that I've been talking about to show you what you can find. So this is a petition regarding Arthur Freeman. And a couple things to look at here is you can see at the top that this is from the House, right? So this went to the House. It was in the 47th Congress in the first session. It has a document number, so it tells you what document is. And it tells you right down here what bill that this is pertains to, which is 795. So there's the actual bill number. And then this is from the Committee on the Public Lands, and they referred this bill for the relief of, let me flip it over. I think it's for the relatives of Arthur. I've got the closed caption and it's blocking this, so I can't really read it. But anyway, so it's for a relief, right? What it was filed. And it was filed on behalf of Arthur Eastman. And I kind of underlined here. So who is Arthur Eastman? He resides in Mount Clemens, Michigan. He was formerly a first lieutenant in Company D, 8th Michigan Cavalry. And he was wounded at the Battle of Sweetwater near Knoxville, Tennessee, and he had a gunshot wound in his left thigh. Well, that is a lot of personal information in there, isn't it? Like, so if this is your ancestor, like not only do you have whatever this claim is talking about, or this petition is talking about, but you are automatically you're told all this information right off the bat. He was a Union soldier. It tells you where he fought. It tells you that he was wounded. He might have got a pension, so that would tell you where to go look for pension information. Surprisingly enough, this is not to do with a pension. This is not like a land bounty or anything like that, a military land bounty. This is actually something different. This is a homestead claim. This has to do with the homestead claim. And what happened was he went and he made a claim on land. As a homesteader, there were certain regulations that you had to do. I think you had to live on it for a certain amount of time. You had to show that you were actively clearing the land and working the land. And if there was any evidence that you were not doing these things, someone could file that you had abandoned the land and try to take your claim. And that is exactly what happened here. So Arthur Eastman made his claim. He filed his claim. He has repeatedly returned to the land. He even paid somebody to help him work it. But he said that he could not do the full extent of what he was supposed to because of his injury during the Civil War. And he says, hey, I really tried. It says he gave an affidavit from a doctor who said, yeah, his injury really kept him from doing it. Yeah, and that he even tried to go work his land, you see, in contrary advice to his physician. He employed this guy, Edward Connor. So there's a lot of people mentioned in this petition here. So what happened was this guy came, he said, oh, this guy abandoned this land, and he tried to file an abandonment claim so he could then take over it. So it actually went to the Bureau of Land Management office, and they heard both arguments, and they decided against Arthur Eastman. They said, oh yeah, he didn't meet the qualifications under law that this homestead piece of land was going to become his. He didn't do what he was supposed to do, so we have to reject his claim and we're going to give it to this other guy. Well, Arthur Eastman was like, this isn't fair. I'm a Civil War Union veteran. I did the best that I could, and even though I didn't meet the letter of the law, I tried, so I think I should get my land back. Well, there's no appeal process to the Bureau of Land Management. There was no process for him to appeal, so he went to Congress and he said, hey, guess what? I think you should give me my land back. These things are the reasons why that I lost my land, why they're saying that I, don't deserve to have it, so give it back to me. And he wins. So basically Congress says, you know what? You got a really good point. The law basically says that you shouldn't get this land, and the Bureau of Land Management ruled against you. But this is a case where, the letter of the law isn't the best, judge here. So we're going to give you your land. So they grant him his land. So the thing to do when you see these, like I said, this is a starting point, right? We're given a lot of information about him. And a lot of places where we can go with this information. We could go to the Civil War records, right? Because we know what company he fought with. So we could actually go look up, he was in the cavalry. We could go look up and see if we can find his Civil War records. That's one bit of information. We could go look in the pension records. Did he get a pension for getting shot? We could go look there. But the other place we can go is we can go to the Bureau of Land Management records. because that's who he had the squabble with, was the Bureau of Land Management. They're the ones telling him, hey, you can't keep your property. So it tells us what his homestead entry is. And so on the Bureau of Land Management, and again, I apologize because it would have been great if I'd had time to like really show you guys that website, because the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, they are where you can find the patents, the entries, the war bounties, the land that was given, the bounty land that was given for people who fought in wars, that were given land out west. That's where you can find all those entries. They're all online and they have a lot of information in them, but we didn't have time to go into really specific details and show that separately, but I will show you an example of looking up information on there. So I know that he is in, his was entry number 7724, Traverse City, Michigan. That's like, I think up near, the Great Lakes, if you are familiar with Michigan. And then so I go to the Bureau of Land Management website. It's glorecords.blm.gov. And again, you'll have this presentation, so you can click on that to see where that's at, or it'll have the URL in there. And I find his entry. So the name on the document, Arthur Eastman. The land office, the local land office where this was filed in was in Reed City. And you can see it's a homestead. And this is showing me, it actually gives the coordinates, so it's showing me the township range, where he filed his claim. And that's on a modern map right there. So I go look, and they actually have digitized copies of the original certificates from the land office. And so this is the certificate showing in Reed City, where he is claiming his piece of property, and it has the description of the property there. Okay, so from there, it also lists the plats for the land. And so I didn't look specifically, so I can't tell you which of these plats is his. If you when I say plat, if you see here, so this is a plat map. So it's showing you basically how these the land is laid out. If you looked at somewhere like North Carolina or anywhere in the South, it's not gonna look like this. We've got mountains and we've got bodies of water, and they were all done kind of sometimes on the fly of marking off the land. So our land plats are all squiggly and crazy like this. Well, when you get out west, they didn't do them that way. They laid them out in grids. And so here is one in Michigan, Traverse City, and you can see how neatly this is laid out, and each square represents a piece of land. And so somewhere in this bigger map is Arthur's piece of land. Now, one thing you can use these maps for with genealogy is if you go to the Bureau of Land Management site and you get a plat map and you start looking for a geographic area and recording who owns the property, sometimes you can see patterns of families. So let's say in this area, if there are 20 people with the last name Eastman that own properties in this area, I don't know for sure that they're related to Arthur, but they probably are. Especially if it's a property that connects him. And that can kind of just lead you to other records and other areas of investigation. Because you might be like, okay, there's all these other people here. What's his relationship? I'm pretty sure there has to be some, especially if you're stuck on him and can't go farther back in the records and you're kind of not sure what to do. You could start researching these people and see if they have a connection there. So one record group can lead to another. So that's all about Arthur Eastman. So he had a happy story. They passed a bill. He got his land. Here's another one. This is about a military land warrant. So this is someone who fought in the military. They were issued land in Ohio. So this happened a lot where you might have a state that is issuing land in another state as part of their bounty land and their land warrants. So North Carolina issued Revolutionary War land in Tennessee. They kind of claimed and said, hey, this is our land and we're giving these land warrants for people who fought in the Revolutionary War under North Carolina. Well, this is what they call the Virginia Military District. So if you were in Virginia and you fought, they gave you land in Ohio. And the State Library of Ohio actually has a whole big website about this where they provide information. And unfortunately, these records were not digitized, or I would have went and looked for the actual land warrant. So this is telling you a lot of really good information about Francis Jarvis. It says he's deceased, so okay, we know he's dead. Of course, this was in 1836, so if he's not dead by now, that might be a problem. But at this time in 1836, he's dead. So this is a time when you don't have death certificates, so at least as a starting point, he died before 1836. And he had a land warrant for 100 acres. It tells you the number for that land warrant, so that should make it pretty easy to find if you wanted to go down that rabbit hole and wanted to see the actual land warrant. And it says that the surveyor laid out the land, and but what happened was that they discovered that land that the surveyor laid out for him had actually already been appropriated. It had actually been given to someone else. So there was agreement made that if they surrendered the warrant, and would be him or his heirs, that they would actually pay in script. They would pay them for it. And there was an act for this. The act on the 30th of May, 1830, said that I can't remember if that's the one that said they could or they couldn't, because basically what happened is they said that they could, but in the meantime, he dies, his heirs inherit, they go to try to find the warrant to turn it in to get the money, and they can't find it. But also the law changes and it says you cannot give money for lost entries. So so that's subsequent act says, you cannot pay if it's lost. So they lost the warrant, they can't turn it in, and so they're like, well, you can't get any money. But then they don't have any land because the land was appropriated for someone else. So what they do is they come and they say, hey, the heirs come, and it does list the heir's name, I think, on this page. Nope, I didn't put the image in there, but they do list the heirs, and they say, hey, give us some money because we feel like we should get something out of this. We didn't get our father's land because you gave it to somebody else, and the law says we can't have money because we can't find the warrant. Would you please give us the money? And they do. They say, yeah, you're right. They say the prayer of the petitioners is reasonable, and they pass the bill, so they get the money. So that was a case of the military land warrant. Now, I didn't look it up, but you probably could find a little bit more about his service. You could look up him. He served in the military in the Revolutionary War because of this is Virginia Military District in the state of Ohio. If you find more information about that, it'll tell you who was given this land, right? So so from that'll tell you more about Francis. And usually specific numbers of land corresponded to specific service. So this was 100 acres. That probably meant something. Either he was an officer, or it meant that he served a certain number of years. Very specific numbers relate to a very specific piece of information. I think 160 acres means something with North Carolina and the Revolutionary War. It means that you served X amount of years. So that's something to look up too. Is like, what did 100 acres mean? It might give you information that you might not find in writing saying he served this, this, and this, but just from knowing that he got the 100 acres in the Virginia Military District means this. So this is another one. This one's fun. So this is a claim for bounty land as a Canadian volunteer. And this is about a gentleman named William Clark. Francis Clark is his father. So there's some really good genealogy information right there. You have William Clark, he's naming who his father is. It's Francis Clark. Francis is giving an affidavit for this petition by William Clark. So William is asking, he said there, because of this certain act that was passed, I should be given some bounty land. And what that act was is it said that American citizens who lived in Canada at the time of the war, that if they volunteered, which they were considered a Canadian volunteer at that time, if they volunteered to fight in the war, they would be given land. And so William Clark did fight, and he went to New York and fought there. And so they were like, oh, okay. Well, when they looked, they realized William Clark had already filed and gotten money for his fighting in New York. So he had already been given 100, I mentioned 160 acres. So that was a specific number there. So he was given 160 acres for fighting in New York. And so they're like, well, in the petition, they kind of weigh this over and they're like, well, we don't know if you can double dip. We don't know if you can get the money for actually serving in the military, plus get the money, an extra amount of money for being the Canadian volunteer. But then he kind of told on himself, because when they pulled the bounty record, and you can see right here, it says that on his record, he says he was born in the province of Canada, which that's good genealogy information too. So, William Clark was born in Canada. Well, that's problematic because the act that he was trying to double dip under, it was for American citizens who had moved to Canada and then volunteered in the United States. So he didn't exactly lie. They actually call him out on this in the other text. They say that William and his father were very careful to never say where William was born. They only said he resided in Canada. They never said he was born there. So they didn't technically lie. They just didn't tell the whole truth, that he was not born in the United States. So therefore, he was not eligible to get more money. So anyway, he was denied. This is an interesting one too. This was published, I think. I can't remember the exact. Oh, this is 1896. And the reason this is interesting is this is a child of a Revolutionary War soldier trying to get her pension. And she's very, very elderly right now. She says she's 91, but that she knows of. And it's kind of telling the story, and it gives a lot of good genealogy information. It tells who her father was. He was Ezekiel Betts. It says, he was in the service of Hezekiah Betts. That wasn't her father's name. Let's see. In the claim of his widow. No, I'm wrong again. It is that, and it shows that he was the service of Ezekiel Betts, Captain Stephen Betts' company. So he was in Stephen Betts' company, but he was a Connecticut volunteer. He was in the War of the Revolution. His widow made a claim, Grace Betts. It shows the pension claim number. So that's a record you could go find. You could actually go look up the widow's pension for him, and that would probably give you more information. It shows when he enlisted in 1779, who he served under. And then it tells the information about her, Mrs. Betts. Miss Betts, she's the only surviving child. He died. So it's giving his death date, 1837. Again, this is a time when there were no death certificates, so this is giving really valuable information. He left a wife who, she filed for the pension, but she died in 1840. So now it's giving you her information. And then it's telling a little bit more about how it was filed. It says that part of his service was actually proved by the Daughters of the American Revolution. So that's kind of interesting that they took her word on it, that yes, this guy is legitimate and this is his daughter. So, but it makes sense that, she's trying to prove that she's the daughter and there's no birth certificates during this time. And anyway, so she gets granted the pension at 91 of her father, who had served in the Revolutionary War. So there's a lot of genealogy information in there. So you probably could go look in the Daughters of the American Revolution and their database online. They have an ancestor database that they have online, and I bet he's in there, because if they're giving information about him, they probably have files on him. And then the other place that you could look, they're getting paid pensions, and anytime anybody's getting money, the Treasury is going to have a record of that. And so that's another place where you could go look in the original records and find more information. So this is I keep saying these are interesting ones. This is another interesting one. I said that you were not going to find a lot of documentation of enslaved people by name. That a lot of times you would find groups of people, but this is an instance where you actually are finding a record that names an enslaved person. This is Archibald Jackson, who he was the slave holder, and the date is now 1831, and he had originally filed in 1830. Um, he is trying to get the bounty land that was due his slave James Gammon, his enslaved person. James ran away and enlisted as a private soldier in the 11th Regiment of Infantry of the United States on June 18th, 1812. So I may have said revolutionary. So this is not revolutionary. Sorry. This is the War of 1812. So he went and tried to file on the fact that his enslaved person um, served. It says that he didn't give him permission to serve, but he let him stay in once he found out he had served, and he actually died during the war. And so now he's dead. He can't make, which he could have made his own claim anyway because he was an enslaved person. So Archibald Jackson is making the case that the land should go to him, and he wins. He actually is awarded the land that would have been due for his enslaved person. I wonder if he would have been given the land and I didn't look to see if there was a case of this, but of an enslaved person, if there was a case where they lived and they should have been given bounty land and their slaveholder was able to claim the land. So I'm betting they would have still gave it to the slaveholder, but in this case, he had died during the war, but they still gave it to the slave, and they gave it to the slaveholder. So this case here, this is the case of John Odell. And this is his children who are actually making this claim. And this is a good one because it has a lot of names in it. So you have John Odell listed. For whatever reason, they did not write in his date of death in the year. I don't know if they were not sure of the exact date and year. That was just kind of interesting, but you can see where they left the blanks. But so John Odell, he died in the state of Tennessee. So that's giving you some information. It tells you who the executors of his will were, F.G. Fuller and J. Mitchell. And then it lists his children. So it says that he had a will and he left his land to Ruth Odell, which was his widow. So we have his wife's first name. And then the children are Mrs. S.A.E. Fuller. So we have her married name, Emily T. McCorkle. This is interesting because it's not listing her as Mrs. because, if she was married, it would commonly listed as Mrs. And it didn't do that. And it's a different last name. So is she an adopted daughter? Was she illegitimate? But then, he's leaving her land. So that's just really interesting so that's a little mystery there that would be interesting to delve into. Maybe she's a widow, but, a lot of times they still would list the married name. It also could be that his widow, Ruth Odell, that she had a child previously to marrying him, that she was married to someone else, or she had a legitimate child, but again, they probably wouldn't name him in the will, but she was maybe married to someone else, and this was from that other family, and he's still listing her. So there's a couple of possibilities on why she's listed with her name and not as a Mrs., but has a different last name. And then you have Mrs. Frances M. Mitchell. So those are the children. We know the widow's name. That's a lot of genealogical information. We know that it was a large and valuable real estate lying in Cock Hamlin in Jefferson County, state of Tennessee. So we know where the state is. I would go look for this will if I was doing this genealogy information. I know there's a will. It lays all this out. I would go look for that will. So that would kind of lead you to some information. But what this claim is saying is that in Tennessee, it's saying they were loyal to the Union, right? But they're living in the South. So it says they were run out of town by Confederates and they had to move away. But what happened was, so when the United States government came in, they considered that, so it was in the 1864, when they start moving through Tennessee, they considered that abandoned property because they had been forced out. They were no longer living there. So the government took possession of the property and made money off of it. They rented the land. And the children are suing the government. They got the land back, but they want the profits from the rent because they were like, hey, we got our land back because we were forced to flee. And they, there's places where they could make claim to get the land back. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they get their land back, but they're like, we deserve the rent money that you all took, you made off our property because it wasn't our fault that we had to leave. And they asked for $12,000. And you'll see like some of these asks are kind of like, really? That's how much money you're asking for? Um, so they asked for $12,000, and in the end, I think they get like 800. So they got a lot less money than they wanted, but they did kind of win their case, so they did get some money back. Sorry, my throat's getting a little dry. So some of the other things that you can find in here. So what we've been looking at specifically is we've been looking again, we were talking about the memorials, the petitions, for the things that were the private laws that people were looking at, that people made claim or wanted something from the government. So those are all really directed with people. There's other kinds of documents in here that even though they are not specifically people asking for something and giving information about one specific person, there are names of lists that were included as part of other things. I mentioned the land thing, where they're saying, hey, the Confederates ran us out of town. We deserve this money. So those kind of claims could be made through the Southern Claims Commission. They're also in these records, they'll say Commissioner of Claims. And there's a whole Southern Claims Commission group of records at NARA. A lot of them have been microfilmed. People have indexed them. They are really heavily researched. But basically, anyone who was a unionist or loyal to the union, even if they live in the South, well, it was particularly in the South, if they had a loss due to the government, like so if Sherman showed up on their doorstep and was like, give me all your horses. And so they had to give them their horses. Or somebody showed up and said, you need to feed my troops, and you did it. And you could also prove that you were loyal to the union. You could actually make a claim and ask for money back. And, I talked about people's claims. I've seen lists of these claims, and, people ask for really outrageous amounts of money and then they get like $100. So I see that over and over again. But the Southern Claims Commission would actually submit a report to Congress, and that's what's in the congressional serial set. So you have that nice summarized report, but then you can take that back to the actual commission's papers and find like the original applications and the more detailed information. I know that some of them have been digitized online. You may find some of them on Family Search. As you can imagine, we keep talking about Family Search because it has a lot of information on there. I want to note one thing that they've done is they have microfilm copies of a lot of these records. So these may not show up in a name search on Family Search, but they do have microfilm that they've digitized that you can browse. They have not indexed the names, but you can browse. And so it's possible that even if they haven't indexed the film for the Southern Claims Commission, they may have it browsable on their site. I didn't look, so I can't tell you specifically if it's there or not. But yeah, there are lots of places that you can find the Southern Claims Commission microfilm. I think we actually have it here in our repository at ECU. There's also lighthouse keepers reports. They would list like where the different lighthouses were located, how much money they were getting, and then the keepers for starting at a certain time period actually had to keep a diary or a log, and then they had to submit that to Congress. So if you find out like an ancestor might have been a lighthouse keeper, you can find out really interesting information about their life because they basically are having to keep a day-to-day log of their life in the lighthouse. If approved patents and patent holders, the patent office actually had to submit the list of the approvals for that year to Congress. The collectors of customs, they actually had to submit the passenger list. Now, it's not going to have like really detailed information. I know that Karen shared some other sources for immigration records, and so those might be a little bit better, but this is going to list, it'll list where the person was from, their name, and I think just really basic information like where they're going. The pension rolls, so like the Revolutionary War pension rolls, the pension rolls for 1812, those are all published in the Congressional Serial Set. Different reports of organizations with congressional charters. I actually include one of them in here, and you'll be like, oh, that was established with a congressional charter. It's like, yes, it was. Does anybody want to guess what it is? I've already mentioned them once in this presentation. But I will tell you, I will show you an example here in a minute. So here is a list of a report that was submitted by the Commissioner of Claims. This is the very first general report they ever submitted. It's in 1871. And so you see the name of the claimant, schedule of claims reported. So this is the Southern Claims Commission. You know, they go by the Commissioner of Claims instead of Southern Claims Commission. Excuse me. But they had the number of the claim, the person's name, and then here again, this is funny. You see, this person at the very top, they're asking for $3,165. They get $595. I love this person asking for 10,000. They don't get any. They're like, nope. And again, you see them asking for like huge chunks of money. Here is the estate of this William Armstrong. And so they're asking for a bunch of money. And so they kind of joined those claims together. And then they allowed them $9,500, but they disallowed $11,000. That would be interesting to see what the claim was for. There's another really high dollar one at the end. You see they're asking for $22,000 and some change. And they allowed around $11,000. So to find these actual claims, so this is just the report that went to Congress, you would look at the number of the claim, and then you could go back to the original records. I think they're organized by claim number and state. If anybody knows, feel free to put in the chat, but just off the top of my head, I think that's how they're organized. So, and again, you can find those. I think some places have digitized those, and then you can usually find them on microfilm pretty easily at different libraries. This is a report that was submitted by the War Department. This is for invalids. This is for people who are trying to make invalid claims, and that's tied to them getting money. So if they could make a claim that they were an invalid and that was approved, then they would, be entitled to money from the government. And before you look at this, trigger warning, there are some like injuries listed. So if you're squeamish about that, I won't read them out loud, but basically they're pretty descriptive. And the reason they disallowed them, some of these are really interesting. So this is one where he's saying, and they're trying to tie these to particular battles because some of the pension or the different acts, like, paying out for this would have specified this is how this is for if you fought at one of them is at Bunkers Hill. So, one of the acts was like, oh, this is if you fought at Bunkers Hill and got money, this is the amount of money you would get. So they're trying to tie them to like specific places and events. And because this is why they might like want to smidge the dates a little bit. So, like here, the July 7, 1777, James Crummett, he's fighting for the New Hampshire Regiment, and he details how he was at Fort Anne. It was the retreat from Ticonderoga, am I saying that correctly? And he details what happened to him, but the doctor that examined him and the War Office said that he mustered in September of 1777. Do you guys see the error here? He did not, or the battle at Fort Anne was July 7th, 1777. So he was not, mustered in means like he joined and checked in. So he wasn't even in the military when that battle took place. So he was not um, able to get compensation for that. So he did, he was wounded he was in a general hospital and he was discharged January the 25th, 1780. So he does get some pension. He gets a 2/3 pension, but he is not entitled to a full pension because he was not at that battle. And sometimes they just say there's no evidence. So this person was wounded in their wrist, William Foster. He said it was at Bunkers Hill. And they're saying there's no evidence in the office whatsoever. I love it. Whatever, no evidence whatever to ascertain the facts stated in his favor. So a lot of times that's what they're saying is like there is no evidence that this claim was going to go through. This is interesting because if they don't get a pension, they may not be listed in those bigger pension indexes. There's like the Revolutionary War Pension Index where people have compiled these records of people getting these pensions. Well, some of these people are getting disallowed. They're not getting these pensions. And so would they have been mentioned in that index, or could they have been possibly left out? So these are people who you might kind of fall through the cracks in those bigger indexes. So it's another place where you can look if you have an ancestor who was alive during that time period and you're not finding them in like any of the military pension indexes, and you're like, well, did they fight or did they just not fight? And that's why maybe they filed for a pension and it was disallowed. So this is, and this would have been put in a report to Congress in the serial set. So this one is another one that has to do with war pensions. This is half pay. So this is widows and children. Remember I said how some of them were tied to specific battles. So this is tied to the Battle of Bunkers Hill. It was a specific half pay for the widows and children of soldiers who were killed or who died of their wounds from the Battle of Bunkers Hill. And what happened was all of these cases, these are different women mentioned, different people mentioned, and they missed the deadline. So I think it was 2 years. They had 2 years in which they could file if their spouse was killed or the children could file if their parent was killed. And all of these women missed it. And so they're making their case, hey, I missed the deadline, but it's documented. My husband died at Bunker Hill, and I deserve to have a pension. And what's really good is they give detailed information. So, like on this one for Alpheus Moore, he is an orphan child of Willard Moore. And it looks like it says in behalf of himself and Willard Moore, orphan children. So his brother is a Willard Moore as well. So there's the names of two children. It says where the town they were living in. And then they're talking about, they say Mark Lincoln and Elizabeth, his wife, late widow of Willard Moore. So here you're given his wife's new name, right? So Willard Moore is the original guy. You're given his two orphan children's name. You're given his wife's name and the fact that she remarried, and you're given the new husband's name. So that is a lot of genealogy information listed in there. And we know when her husband was killed. We know when the original Willard Moore was killed. And we know how he served. And then, so you can kind of investigate more. You could probably find something more on his military record. And just so you know, these were all approved. So then they will actually have an approved pension. So since they were approved, you can then go look for the actual pension record now. Because they'll be in there. So there's a lot of information mentioned in a lot of places. And because they were paid out a pension, you can go look in the treasury records and see what they were paid out and how long they were paid out. They're supposed to be paid it's a very specific amount of time. I think it says in here they get the half pay and it's for X amount of years. And again, there's other people listed in here that are giving information about their families as well. So this is one of the registers. I mentioned that the customs person they had to submit reports. They just submit like a summary. So this is a copy of that report here. And you can see they're listing the name of the collector. So the custom house collector, the name of the passengers on the ship. It gives their ages, their sex, their occupation, the country to which they belong, and then where they intend to become inhabitants. So, and basically this is cities. So this is this person's going to Petersburg, this person's going to Boston, Richmond. And then they give a little bit of information what the ship was and who the commander was. So if you can't find someone in one of the bigger immigration indexes, you might come here. They might be listed here instead. And for whatever reason got left out of those indexes. But these are, again, the reports that were sent to Congress. And then I mentioned the patents. So this is an example of a report that's submitted to Congress of the patents. And you can see it lists the person's name, and it lists what it was that they invented or whatever the device or thing was, and then the patent number. And if you have the patent number, you can go look up the original patent, which might give you a little bit of information. So the reason I picked this page is because I saw that it's cut off, but there were boss backs on this patent form. I mean, in the patent index, and I have relatives that have the last name Bossback, so I was curious, and they own a fertilizer company, so I was like, oh, I wonder if they filed any patents for their fertilizer, but this was a different Bossback, it wasn't my guy, so, and it usually lists just the names, the first and last name, and then it lists, what date they filed, and then what town, and you can see here for Noella Baum, they actually have it listed, that she's deceased. And then they also have CJ Baum, the administrator. So he actually is filing on her behalf, her estate. So actually that's a woman. So administratrix, I can't say that, the IX, that means that's a woman who is the minister of the estate. An administrator would be a man. And if it with the IX, it means it's a woman. So that's someone, a female related to her, probably a relative, probably a sister or something, maybe a child, or that could be her child and she could be the parent. So there's genealogy information right there. There's some relationship between these two females, and that one is filing on Noella's estate's behalf because she is now deceased. So there are some registers and directories that are in there. So I talked about like them retracting documents and then going back and asking for stuff to be redacted. I think a lot of that is in these official registers, because basically the beginning ones of these, they were trying to list everyone that worked for the federal government on a kind of a high level. But they actually, I think, did even list the janitors in there and the people who were working on buildings. Like, it wasn't just the administrative people. They listed everybody. So I said at a high level, but I'm like, no, they actually did list pretty much everybody, I think. So you'll find some really interesting information in these, and they have they covered civilians, military, and naval employees. So they're not listing every person enlisted in the military. So there is that. So they're listing the higher level people, and then they're the civilian people working for the military and the Navy. And a lot of times that's they're doing like office jobs and things, and they do list the officers, but like the enrolled people, they do not list those. Those are in separate records. And then different agents of the federal government, like the customs people, those would have been agents. And this, they included the register or parts of the register from 1816 to 1959. And I've got the first page of one of them right here. And then so here, I mentioned the post office, and in the American State Papers, they actually had their own set of records in there because it was by theme. Well, in the congressional serial set, they're all mixed through, right? Because I said it was sequential in how it was filed and published. And so they're mixed in there, but in the part with the official register, you will find like some different postal stuff. So this is the mail messenger service. And it lists the post office, and then this person here is going to be the postmaster, sorry, and their compensation. And so it is just like a list of names and towns and amounts here, but you can find more information in other records. So again, this is like a starting point. And then there are other records that show, give more information about where these post offices are included. And I wanted to include this. So this is the section, this is from the official register in 1883. And this is the Library of Congress. And I was like, oh, well, who's working in the Library of Congress in 1883 and how much money are they making? And so you can see that it's the Library of Congress and the Register of Copyrights. And I think I wonder if this might be the Librarian of Congress since they're listed first, Ainsworth Spofford. I'm sure that would be easy to find out if that was who the Librarian of Congress was. And so they're making $4,000. And then here are all the different assistants. So that's kind of interesting. And then the laborer. So they had a laborer who worked Library of Congress. I don't know, I don't know what a laborer means in this context. Maybe it's the person in facilities or the person who was the shelfer. I don't know. But so there is a laborer and they're only making $40. And I'm not sure if that compensation is yearly, monthly. I'm pretty sure it's not monthly because I don't think they're making, even the Librarian of Congress is not making $4,000 a month in 1883. It might be yearly. I'm not sure. I'd have to do more research. This is one of the roles that the United States reports the United States Army submitted. And you can see here, so this is Deputy Paymaster Generals, the Lieutenant Colonels, the majors. So it has it listed by their rank. You can see the captains. It has where they were born and then where they're actually appointed. And then you can see, I'm looking here for this person, Asa Carey, and Asa is in Connecticut. They were born in Connecticut, but they are now appointed at the military academy. So that person is one of them. And there's another person there, Alfred Bates, at the military academy. It's a major there. So that's kind of interesting because it's giving you an idea of, a lot of these people, I'm looking at the other side. You can see a lot of these people are actually appointed in military academies. But there are people in other places, and you can kind of guess if they're in Kentucky, where would they probably be stationed? And it's the Army, probably Fort Knox, right? Because that's the major military place there. So I said that there were people that gave reports that were from congressional charters. It's the Daughters of the American Revolution is one of those, interestingly enough. So they actually had a congressional charter. So if you did, you had to give a report to Congress. And so this is the second report that they did. And I don't know why, but they included this lovely photograph of their DAR boat. And in the report. So I just thought that would be nice to include. So sometimes you get interesting illustrations or photos in these books. And they actually, in their report, they actually submitted some really good information, some really good genealogical information. They had a project where they were identifying where all the Revolutionary soldiers were buried at. And so they have this grave project, and I think you can find it online, but in these reports, they are doing research on these people. And so they're actually submitting extra information about them, not just what cemetery they were in. So this one, the very first one, we mentioned Bunker Hill a few times. So this is Joseph Allen. They're telling where he's born, where he fought, how he was enlisted. He received a pension. He had 9 children, and they have the date he died. So there is a lot of genealogy information in these. So those can be kind of valuable. They also had other duties. I find this really interesting because I couldn't imagine this happening today, but they actually were in charge of vetting and picking the nurses who went and fought for the Spanish-American War. So this is the roster of women nurses enlisted for Spanish-American War by the DAR Hospital Corps. So this is the officers of the Corps. So these are the people here who actually were looking at the applications and they were picking. And I'm like, I just cannot imagine us asking the DAR, hey, well, will you look at and certify if you think these nurses are ready to go to war. And apparently they received hundreds of applications, and they could only pick a certain number of women to go as nurses and serve in the army as army nurses. So that was kind of blew my mind when I saw that. I was like, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And so this is listing all those people who are on those committees. So you never know what you're going to find in these records. Yeah, this was a little strange, but so another thing, I said I wasn't going to get too much into military records, but I will talk about the official records of the War of the Rebellion, because those are actually published in the congressional serial set. And that's what they were ordered, and you can even read in the serial set of the original orders, like to publish these and the laws that were enacted in order for this to be published, and saying like, hey, we need to get these records together. And then as they were published, they were actually published as part of the serial set. But then, I don't know how many of you at your library, you have this huge collection of black books, which is, and on the bindings is official records of the War of the Rebellion. The Broadfoot, the publisher Broadfoot, actually did a whole republication of the entire series and all the indexes. And so I think that's what a lot of the public libraries have. We actually have them here at ECU, and it's the Broadfoot edition. The original ones are still out there. I have seen a collection of the original ones, but we don't have them in our library. But that is how they were originally published as part of the serial set. So you can search these records as part of the serial set as well. So the original set of records was the main Army ones. They were published from 1881 to 1901. They were later renamed War of the Rebellion, a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate armies. And there are, like I said, several different indexes published. Like the volumes have their own indexes, and then there are these compiled indexes as well. And then later was the official records of the Union and Confederate navies in the War of the Rebellion was published from between 1894 and 1922. And it has a general index that covers all of it. As you can imagine, the coverage of Union records is much more extensive than the coverage of Confederate, because, when the Confederate Army realized it was losing, they started destroying records. And then people took records, they kind of looted it. And it's really interesting to read in the congressional serial set. It talks about at one point they were buying individual collections of Confederate records that had been taken by individuals. They were buying them as like manuscript collections and trying to buy them back. And then they just realized that it was costing way too much money. They couldn't afford to do that. So then they were like, no, we can't do that. And so they then said, we can't pay money for these. But they did have a large collection. Jefferson Davis actually kept his records, and he gave his records to the US government. And so that's where a lot of really good records come from the Confederacy, was the ones that Jefferson Davis had. So basically they compiled these records and then put them in a manner that people could do research. They have like the different correspondence, the orders, the summaries of the campaigns that happen. So if you have an interest in the Civil War or specific battles or specific things that happen, you can go into these records and these indexes and look. And there are people, lots and lots of people mentioned in these. I have some Civil War ancestors. I have one that was a Confederate, and then he switched sides when he got caught, and then he became Union, and then he got a Union pension. So, well, basically his wife got a Union pension, and then shortly before she died, they kind of were like, hey, wait a minute, wasn't your husband also a Confederate soldier? And she's like, whoops. So she said she did not know. Not sure how she didn't know that he was. Anyway, so that's a whole other story, but that's the kind of things you can look for. But he unfortunately is not mentioned in these. A lot of the people mentioned are going to be like people of rank. You have your commissioned officers and, people in charge, because they're giving orders. And so it's not going to have like, I was telling a lot of information about my ancestor. I did not find that in the official records. I had to go look in the the muster records, and I had to look in pension records to find that, and that's separate. The only thing that would be in the congressional serial set with the pension was be the pension rolls, and that would be, the union pension rolls. So this is a copy of the general index that one of the pages. Remember, I was talking about how in that when I was looking at some of the indexes that I was thinking they were people's names, but this is one where no, these are ship names. You can see American Schooner, the steamer, and it took me a minute to look at it. I was like, oh, these are ship names. So if there was a specific ship that that you find out your ancestor was on, you could actually track probably what they were doing in service by the ship name. And that's the big thing, is like, not always, sometimes people were off on detail, which means that they were sent off to do something else, but often your person or your ancestor that you're researching, they would have went with whatever unit they were assigned to. So if you track the unit and what it's doing in these records, it gives you an idea of, this is probably what my ancestor or this person who I'm researching, this is probably what they were doing. If this unit went and attacked at, a certain place, they were probably involved in that. So it kind of can fill in some of the gaps of, like, you get these broad ideas of service, but if you want detailed accounts, like, okay, they camped here at this time, they then went there at this time. These records do that. They give you some pretty detailed information of what the different people or at least the different units are doing. And this is an example. Here is where this is, I think this is units. The reports from East Tennessee are so threatening that the western borders of North Carolina are demanding protection. I have a regiment here. Oh, this is Union, because it says Colonel Vance. Colonel Vance is just from that section. Should I order them to the borders of East Tennessee? And this is Henry Clark saying this. And so this is really interesting, because they're like, this is an emergency. We need help. So again, this is giving you an idea of what's happening where, and this was in Raleigh that they sent this correspondence from, and he's sending this to J.P. Benjamin, who was the Secretary of War. So again, this is just filling in some of the gaps. If you read some of this here, this even says, this is talking about during a battle, and it's saying, what they yelled out. It says, calling out the name of one of the rangers whom the picket would have known. They called, "It's Cage, it's Cage." This affirmed the picket, and they kept up the fire. So it even is telling, like, what was yelled out during battle. So it can give some really detailed information. And also it's talking about one of the colonels. They had a farm there at the river. They supplied our men with meat from it last night. So they're giving all kinds of information about these areas, and they're seeing it as a Bowling Green, so they're giving names too, of like where they're located at that time. So that's just kind of a brief touch on the official records. You could talk about them a lot more, but I think I've given you all kind of the general idea of the kind of materials they would have. A lot of it's in correspondence, but then a lot of it, they had to actually make congressional reports on the updates on the war. So those are also included, what they're reporting out, like, this is what happened. So really good information in there. I did want to briefly mention Indigenous people in the serial set. I kind of talked about this earlier, of how a lot of when they're mentioned is as a group of people. Though the Indian rolls were, because, the census rolls were published as part of the serial set, they're included in that. The Indian rolls are also published in the congressional serial set. But again, they're way easier to search in a lot of other places than looking in the serial set. But I wanted to mention the University of Oklahoma, their digital website, where they have actually went in and they have pulled out all of the documents that talk about groups of Indigenous people, and they have digitized those, and they have those available online. So if you wanted to research, again, it's not great for specific people, but if you were wanting to research about, like, when were the Cherokee having to move, and really detailed accounts of what Congress was doing and what they were saying about I just mentioned the Cherokee is the first thing I think of. And so those documents are going to be in there. However, Congress interacted or decisions they made about these indigenous people are going to be in these documents. So I just wanted to mention this website because I think it does a great job of bringing those out without you having to search through the different volumes. So that is kind of, let me check time. Okay, I'm not doing too bad because this last part won't take very long. But I'm kind of going to shift gears and we're going to leave the congressional serial set behind. And I'm going to briefly talk about the Freedmen's Bureau because I think it's really important. And again, Karen and I both said this. We are just touching on, you know, the tip of the iceberg on federal documents. I know there's a lot of different documents that you might be like, why didn't she talk about this? We just don't have time. But I did want to talk about the Freedmen's Bureau because this documents a lot of different people. I think people think that it only documents African-American people or formerly enslaved people. That is not true. It actually, the full name is the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. And so the refugees, it's actually very specific what they're referring to. This is people who are not freedmen, who are not formerly enslaved, but who are refugees, people who were displaced by the Civil War. And often that would be white people. Now you could have some free people of color who were displaced by the Civil War, and then they would kind of fall under refugee because they were already free, so they were not freed by the war. So that's an important distinction to make, is those refugees are people who are kind of have been disenfranchised by the war. So you get African-American people and you get white people. And I've looked to see if Native Americans and how they're referred to in the records, that are they also a lot of, were things handled by the Freedmen's Bureau with them? And I haven't found that so much. And I've asked a professional researcher who's worked in these, and she said she has not seen a lot of things specifically pulled out about that. So if you've actually researched these and found them referring to Native Americans or Native American claims, please let me know. Because I can definitely tell you I don't know everything. So it was established in 1865 at the end of the war. And again, you know, according to the National Archives, in their finding guide, they said that the Freedmen's Bureau, as it's commonly called, was responsible for the supervision and management of all matters relating to the refugees and freedmen and lands abandoned or seized during the Civil War, duties previously shared by military commanders and U.S. Treasury Department officials. So the kind of records in these are labor contracts, complaints and resolutions, including from court cases, applications and lists for rations and clothing allotments. So, you know, I mentioned that there were not just African-American people listed in here. There were 4 indigenous Southern whites who would ask for rations, and so you would have these lists, and it would tell you, is this person considered a refugee asking for rations, or is this, that it did not distinguish African Americans, which is really unusual during this time period, because usually you have, even in the city directories, you know, later on they're putting color next to their name. No, it's actually the white people who are identified. So also lists of orphans from the war. So with children who were left orphaned, white or black, because of the war, the Freedmen's Bureau helped open orphanages. They helped open schools. So records of the schools, applications and claims for abandoned land. So if someone property had been claimed by the government and said that it was abandoned land, they could then sort of try to reclaim it, and they could appeal to the Bureau and ask to get it back. And there's also lots of government correspondence about things happening, circulars, government reports, because it was the military that ran the Freedmen's Bureau. So you see a lot of references to military things. And I've transcribed some of these records, and it was really helpful to go look up some of the military terminology to kind of to be able to transcribe and understand what I was reading. And then there's two places you can look for these. They're on microfilm, but they've been, a searchable name index has been created at Family Search. And then the National Museum of African American History and the Smithsonian partnered together, and they actually were creating a larger index where they digitized the images. You could go online and transcribe them as part of their project. And then it gave more accessibility to the records because it allowed, not just like the main names to be searched, it was other names as well. And I wanted to show you all a few examples, and I promise I'm wrapping up. Another trigger warning, there are some pretty descriptive violence happening here. So I will not like read out, but I'll just talk in general about some of the things happening. So please do not try to read if if it's going to bother you. So basically this is a list of cases that were being considered. You have the name of the complainants on the left-hand side. So most of these, I think all of these are African American people who are having some kind of case that they're bringing to the attention of the local office for the Freedmen's Bureau. And then there is a name that keeps reappearing in this, and it's George Alf Conley. And it's really terrible because if you read these descriptions on these different individuals, he is doing terrible acts to them. He abuses some children. There's someone he doesn't like or he wants to get back at, so he basically kind of kidnaps the children, and the word lash is used, and administers lashes to them. He is with another band of guys that attack a different gentleman. I mean, it sounds like this guy was just going around the area. And I did Greenville. I actually looked at Pitt County because I live in Pitt County and I was curious. And I've never come across this guy's name in other research. But he was just doing terrible things. And he actually is arrested and convicted. And on the right side, it tells you what the decisions made. So he did get in trouble. A lot of what you'll see too are complaints because people will go work for someone and then they won't pay them. And there's some of that listed in here too, though. Will say, I went and did this work and I never got paid. And so you will see documentation of that. Some of the people who I help with the research, if you have a ancestor who was a landowner and who was white in some of these areas, if they're mentioned in these records, it's probably not a good thing. They were probably not doing good things. And they're having complaints made against them. Now that's not always the case because, sometimes they'll be mentioned because they're doing a contract with a freedman, because they did a lot of work contracts and maybe they're listed with that. But if other times if there's complaints made, it's because they are not paying or they're doing something bad. One guy is trying to hold a woman's children from her. So just keep that in mind. And then this is just and I'm going to go faster because I know we're running out of time. So you can see here, Yankee Hall. That's actually, I'm familiar with that place in Pitt County. So that's interesting. So that it's Carney. I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing. Carney. He said apparently tied to Yankee Hall. That would be a place to do research in regards to some of these. When you see these contracts, some of these you could kind of, not always, but sometimes they're now doing contracted labor. And the reason the people aren't wanting to pay them is because these people may be formerly enslaved, that the people who they're working for may have been their slaveholders, and those people don't want to pay them now, or they think they can get away with it. But that's something to consider is if you find an ancestor and then they're working for someone, it's possible that person they're working for was a former slaveholder to that person. So that can kind of maybe help you do some with your genealogy research. This is another report. This is a report from teachers for a school. It tells how many teachers. It actually has the name of the teachers and where they're located. It doesn't list the students. This is another report that is listing, I think this one is more information about teachers. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's not teachers. Oh, this is a hospital report. And you remember I said that this is like one of the first times where I was seeing where they were actually listing calling out like who's white as by calling them refugees. In the hospital reports, they do that. And I'll show you here in a minute an example on the ration list where they do this. But these are people who are in the hospital. And it's saying that this is why this is This is not the hospital list. I am so sorry. This, I believe, is the ration list itself. I will get it correct in a minute. This is one of the ration lists, and the remarks over here is saying why they need rations. So like this person has rheumatism, they're confined to their bed. That's why they need rations. And it's saying where they're located, so it has the farm. And then it details like this is the reason why that person is asking for rations. And then here I kind of zoomed in so you could see it, and they tell how many children, they not only have their name, but they say how many children they have. So it does give you some more detailed information about people. This is one where, oh, this is the remarks. So again, it's telling you this couple, she has rheumatism, she's confined to bed. And then here's a note, this person, they said the Smith Farm, it's on the Isle of Wight. I think this is in Virginia. So it does give some information where people are living. This is the hospital one. Sorry, I got them mixed up. So this is a hospital that has people in it. And again, there are the refugees mixed in, which would have been the white people who were disenfranchised during the Civil War. The rest of the people you could assume were freedmen. And it lists their name, it lists where they're from, what date they were admitted, and some different information. And they have ticks over here, and I'm not sure what the different ticks stand for, because they've used an old form and they've crossed it out and like are now using it for their purposes. So I know that was like a quick run through the Freedmen's Bureau records, but I did want to make sure I touched on those because it's a great record set. Do we have any questions? And okay, it's 4:04, not too far over.
So far, I don't see any questions. This has been very exciting, and I hope y'all will do another one to dig into some more different types of records for us. This has just been incredible, educational, wonderful workshop.
And it's a lot. Some of these are pretty dense. So I think I'm losing my voice even talking about them. So if you nod it off at any point in time in the presentation, I'm okay with that.
I didn't realize there were so many records in the serial set. Like, that's pretty awesome.
One thing I forgot to mention, because I talked about the bounty lands. This also goes for if you have ancestors out west, so like in California and Texas, about lands that were taken during the Spanish-American War. People could make claims. So if they got the land from Spain, if they were given the land, and then they wanted to make a claim to get the land back because then, the United States took it over and was like, okay, now it's ours. So I can't even talk. Those are in the congressional serial set too, of these claims from, that they originally owned the land, and those show up there. So that's really interesting if you know that your ancestors were landholders and they were in those states. You can see if they might have originally been given the land by Spain and then had to reclaim it from the United States or Mexico, but reclaim it after the war. And now I'm really done.
Well, thanks everyone. We'll send out the recording when we have that available. Thanks you guys so much for teaching us about all these awesome records and how to get to them today. I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.